All right, we are going live. We're going live, and yeah, just gotta. Oh, yeah. Say it's kind of a little shame right there. Immediately see a notice that says, "Nope, you can't live stream right now on Twitter. Alas, it requires more money than we are willing to cough up. So this will just be your typical live stream." Hi there, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good day, wherever you are at. Hope that the audio is coming through beautifully. And I am about to check that out for myself. Just make sure that it is all going just fine. Jake Branch is here. Shade is here. Great to see you both. Hope you're doing well. And fantastic. Yay, there we go. Audio is indeed working. Woohoo. Star Drop Mellow is here. Woohoo. Arts. Awesome. Good evening, good sir. Good evening to you as well. All right. Say, tonight, our topic of conversation, all that is going to be writing vampires. And it works out actually a little well to have some footage from Murder Drones going because, at least in the beginning of the show, there was definitely a lot of vampirism going on. And I remember all the speculation that the disassembly drones were based off of vampires at first. However, that was rolled back as we got more into what Absolute Solver was and the changes that Sin brought to the drones. First off, I saw that Shade right here has a rebuttal against what I said about Dracula, and I still stand by that. Yeah, Dracula was by Bram Stoker's own creation. What he had made was meant to be this sexy, dangerous immigrant who comes on over to England and threatens it. What you say right there about how this is unique that a monster followed someone home, and it's actually not. This is very, very common that the monsters will come on over to your home. It's one of the aspects of horror that you cannot escape these monsters or these curses or these spirits once you have broken the rules. Once you have done something that causes them to come after you, you're screwed. The difference between Dracula and so many of the other creatures that come out of mythology or the fiction of that century, of the 19th century, was that Dracula was presentable. You could not tell, unless you knew him intimately, that he was a monster. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing. And this actually differs very greatly from how vampires were presented in the beginning. Because vampire lore, at its heart, has them as just these horrible, disgusting, undead things that corrupt the land, the world, and the people around them, even by their mere presence, transforming other people into vampires. That is the original Eastern European lore of vampires. Different cultures, different societies do have various origins for vampires and different descriptions of them, which we will be getting into tonight. But that was one of the things that made Bram Stoker's Dracula so utterly terrifying to his readers, was that this was a vampire that you could not detect. He could come in as this nobleman, as an immigrant of refined proportions, which we have to understand at the time that Bram Stoker was writing, there was a serious wave of xenophobia that was going throughout England, but actually all throughout Europe, thanks to a surge of nationalism at that time. There's a whole lot that goes into why Bram Stoker wrote Dracula the way that he did. It was very much informed by the world that Bram Stoker lived in that moment. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense of where I was coming from with that, because especially for the people who see vampires a certain way or who see Bram Stoker's Dracula a certain way, especially those who are all like, Dracula was actually Bram Stoker's wife in disguise. I have heard that argument multiple times. But that's that right there. That is the truth. And it comes down to something that we've discussed on this channel many times before. You write what you know. So let's then catch up with some of the other things that people have said right here. Fabio is here. Woohoo! I have one possible planned vampire. It came amidst the idea of making a live alive game. Okay, sweet. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your vampire idea. Arts, as long as it's not Twilight. We'll have the most briefest of allusions to Twilight, because Twilight is one of those series that actually did help to rewrite the vampire for the modern age and to actually shift gears away from actually something that I've included in today's lesson, talking about how the vampire was transformed, again, thanks to Bram Stoker and the writers who followed immediately after him. Darkest Daydreams is here. Woohoo! In this house, we don't say blah, blah, blah. I don't say blah, blah, blah. You know what? Hotel Transylvania is just such a good movie. I can't really speak to the sequels because I was kind of like, there's no way. You can't top this. Also, I don't want to see a really good story just milked into oblivion because it's for cheap laughs and gags. So I actually haven't seen the other Hotel Transylvania movies. Maybe one day I will, and I might end up really enjoying them. But I was like, please don't tarnish the first movie. Art says, that's interesting. That gave me a thought. You think Chris and Des going into the bunker broke some rule of the Dark World that someone friend as a consequence of them wandering somewhere? Yes. That's because, so Arts, to kind of deviate already a little bit away from that, but you bring up a really good question. Would it be that what drew Chris and Des into the horrible situation that we find them in Deltarune, could it be because they broke some unknown rule, i.e. crossing a boundary that they weren't supposed to, maybe initiating a ritual that was off limits, maybe exploring an aspect of the Dark World that they shouldn't have? It would work out really, really well. Because as we've discussed in a previous lesson, monsters are supposed to operate based on rules. If you do not have rules for how these monsters work, you end up creating something so entirely convoluted that it's very, very hard to keep the story going the way that it should. And if there aren't any rules, people will disassociate from this monster, and they will cease to be scared of it. One of the things that makes monsters horrifying is what we know they can and will do based on the rules, and especially if you're not told all of the rules, you are left in abject fear because you don't yet know what could make this monster come after you. This is a highlight of Japanese horror storytelling. And just this last weekend, when I went to do a horror movie marathon in the woods for a friend's birthday, which was absolutely amazing, such a great time, we watched Jeepers Creepers. It was the very first time I watched it, and what I loved is that in the movie, you learn as the story progresses what the rules are for the creeper, and the thing is that by the time that you learn some of the more important rules, it's already too late. And in hindsight, you realize that the siblings really, really, really screwed up when they went back to the house to check on what happened with the corpses. It was an admirable thing to do, but it was the wrong thing to do because the creeper then caught their scent and could then forevermore hunt them down, which is a rule that they didn't know, which they don't learn until over halfway through the movie. So that right there is an excellent example of the rules that a monster operates by. You don't always need to tell the audience the rules right up front. In fact, you probably shouldn't, in order to heighten the suspense. And this is very likely what's happened to Chris and to Des. And maybe even we'll find out what even happened to a certain extent to Azrael and Noelle within Deltarune. Because of the choices that were made, boundaries were crossed, rules were broken, horrors were invited in, and the moment that you invite them in, you must play by their game, which works out really well for Deltarune because they are literally having to play the game that the demons are forcing them to play. And Shade says, lost the respect for you, but using the term vampire to describe creature from different cultures of mythology will be incorrect. Oh, this is why this lesson is so important. Fabio, so I'll see where this goes. Excellent. So kind of, yeah, Art's already crossing the boundaries. And then Darkest Atrium says, are you saying Friend is a vampire? Saying that Friend is definitely a monster of some kind. Sure, go on ahead, Jay, talk about Tsukihime. Then Art says, Darkest Daydreams, I'm saying Friend is a punishment for Chris and Des messing with forces beyond their comprehension. Which is very likely what's going on. And then Fabio says, as far as the movies go for Hotel Transylvania, I think I'd only recommend 2 and 3. Okay, first two Hotel Transylvania movies were good. 3 had the goofy Macarena scene, but that's all I really liked about it. Oh, then I guess I could just watch the Macarena scene on YouTube. My mind went to FNAF. Technically, ain't the minigame in Pizza Simulator or whatever of needing to check if you include or reject an outside animatronic, based on not breaking their unknown rules, not to get jump scared. Alrighty. Which is true. That is true. FNAF is another instance where you are learning as you go. You're not told up front what your character or what you are getting into once you take on this job at Freddy's. I remember the Macarena being in the newspaper. All right. So, without any further ado, let's just dive into the topic of tonight. I think that will serve us very, very well. So, vampires. And here you go. Here's your little stint of Twilight, because we got all kinds of vampires. We got Interview with a Vampire. We've got Blade. We've got the Count. And then, of course, we have Nosferatu. So, or I should say a Nosferatu. Count Orlok is the proper name of that particular buck-tooth monster. The Count. I don't know how many of you have actually seen, I know this is just a very brief tangent. I don't know how many of you have seen the really, really hilarious music video of the Count getting bleeped as he sings I Like to Count. Every time he says count, he gets bleeped out. And so it makes the song so insanely dirty, but it's just a sweet little Muppet song. Oh, man. I love it. So, our goals for the evening. Understand what vampires are. We also want to research different types of vampires, and we also want to work out what kinds of vampires, whether they be from traditional mythology or fiction or something entirely new, will work best for your story. ISO is here. Woohoo! All right. So, first off, I really wanted to include this little quote into the lesson because it's so very true, especially when you look at the long history of vampires, and not just Eastern European vampires, but how vampires as a whole across the globe are now perceived. And there is a shift in perception even now, thanks to what Twilight got going. The even more sexification of vampires, making them even more desirable. Oh, yes. Rather than monsters that could either be very dangerous or very sweet, maybe a combination of both. So, vampires shifted from purely reflecting fear of death to fearing deviance. Anyone who fell outside of the bounds of local, social, and man, that's what happens when you actually have a little thing on over there, which you guys actually can't see. So I gotta switch over here. So anyone who fell outside the bounds of local and social religious mores could come back to destroy everything. And I actually want to pause here as far as the lesson goes to give a practical application of this that goes beyond Dracula, that is real world. And if any of you are interested in this, actually, let me just make sure I get the name of this particular documentary correct. Let's see here. It's from Secrets of the Dead, which is a fantastic series on PBS. I highly, highly recommend it if you're looking for some really interesting history and not archaeology. Yeah, archaeology. Not archaeology, anthropology. There's the word. If you're looking for some really interesting history and anthropology into ancient figures or more historical figures and how they died, or some really creepy deaths, Secrets of the Dead is chef's kiss. It is amazing. Their most recent documentary, which was just dropped this week, was about the code breakers surrounding Mary Queen of Scots. Was a really, really intense, really, really cool documentary. Highly recommend it. But let me see here. Secrets of the Dead Vampire Graveyard. Okay, yes, here it is. Field of Vampires. I'm going to put the name here into the chat. Field of Vampires. This is a documentary that I highly recommend people go check out, especially to learn about old school vampires before authors began to really take vampires into a different direction. This documentary will put vampires into a very different light for you. It's super cool and it's super creepy. So to now use a real world story that builds on this how vampires once represented just the fear of death, and then began to transition more to the fear of people who fell outside your local and societal norms and your religious norms. So Field of Vampires covers the bizarre story of a village in Poland which was conquered by the Swedes during the Great Northern War, when Sweden was all like, we are now going to officially become a world power. And everyone was shocked because Sweden just came in and just started slapping everyone. Germany, boom, get owned. Poland, boom, get owned. Lithuania, boom, get owned. Russia, slap, 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 until Russia came back and just throat punched Sweden and was like, no. And then Peter the Great began bulldozing his way to creating an empire. Cool story, but coming back to the vampires, this village in Poland feared the outbreak of a vampire epidemic. You see, they had buried someone in the graveyard who they feared might transform into a vampire. The reason why they feared that is because this person exhibited certain diseases, an undesirable nature in life. And this young woman, even though she had come from a very affluent family from Sweden, she seemed to not really like it there. She seemed bitter, vengeful. She was sick. And so when they buried her in the graveyard, they're like, what if this woman comes back as a vampire? Because according to Eastern European lore, people who were buried in the graveyard with serious, deep regrets and with dangerous diseases could come back as the undead. And the problem is that you might not know it until it's too late. And a miasma, an energy that would seep out from them, could even corrupt the other corpses in the graveyard and transform them all into the undead, either into straight up vampires or into a weaker version of a vampire or a thrall of the vampire, and thereby create an army of the undead who would tear their way out of the graves and then begin attacking the living. So after they buried this woman, they're all like, what if we just created a vampire? Oh my gosh. So what they did is they then put in the woman's grave, they put a massive blade across her neck. So if she should ever come up, she would then be decapitated. They then began tearing up all the other graves in the graveyard, and they began putting holy crosses and nails through people's chests. They would break off the legs and then bury the legs somewhere else. Even small children had spikes driven through them to pound them into the soil and into leaden boxes in order to prevent any potential vampires from coming up. And they were so terrified that this was not enough to prevent a vampire outbreak that everyone who died during this time period was then brought on out of the village and then buried in a mass grave away from the village. And this mass grave was then discovered relatively recently by Polish farmers after a large rainstorm washed out part of the land, and then all of these bones from dozens of bodies spilled out into the fields. And they're like, oh my gosh, what the heck? Where did all these bodies come from? And so this prompted a forensic search into where all these bodies came from. And then they went back to the village and found that all these bodies in the village had been mutilated and had been booby-trapped or spiked. And the only reason why you would ever do that is to prevent a vampire breakout. And so, coming back then to this quote, this is a historical, real-world application of this quote. The Poles feared what would happen if the dead should arise. The dead would arise if there was sickness or ill intent or massive regret buried into their land. So this links it to the fear of death, which is what the vampires originally symbolized. But as they then interacted with other people, the Swedes, who were their conquerors, and they did not like the Swedes, there was a good reason to suspect that Swedish woman over there, and especially one with illness, she could make a vampire. We need to booby trap her coffin. So this is a real world application again of this quote. Vampires shifted from purely reflecting fear of death to fearing deviance. Anyone who fell outside of the bounds of local social and religious mores could come back to destroy everything. This becomes more pronounced in the 19th century with Bram Stoker's take on Dracula, but was taken even further by other writers. If you want an excellent example of this, you can read Lovecraft's work. While Lovecraft dealt with cosmic horrors rather than vampires, it's still there. Who was the guy who wrote Conan the Barbarian? Because he also did a series with this monster killing pilgrim. Crud! Why am I forgetting the name? I gotta quickly look this up. Let's see here. Author of Conan, Robert E. Howard. Okay, Robert E. Howard actually wrote, after Bram Stoker, his own vampire stories, and he also leaned into this idea of that the vampires are the deviants, the people from outside, rather than embodiments of the fear and torture of death. So we see this evolution of how vampires have been portrayed. Coming now to more modern times, and you then look at Vampire the Masquerade, or Interviews with a Vampire, or something like Twilight, where vampires, or Buffy the Vampire Slayer even, Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the spin-off series Angel. Vampires are incredibly dangerous. Like, they should be feared. But at the same time, there's something human about these unnatural, undead, eternal beings. And there's even maybe something to sympathize with. Maybe even something that one could come to love under certain circumstances. Depends on your interactions and personal relationship with that vampire and the individual vampire that you come across. Vampires are evolving in fiction. And this would also work out kind of well, as these days there is a push to explore the deviants. What is it like to bring someone from the outside of society and bring them in, normalize them, and make them the hero? If that's the case, then why not make a vampire a more sympathetic or even a heroic character within a story? Oh, so again, the evolution of vampires. We are seeing it happen right now. So this quote could very well become outdated in time. We'll just have to see where fiction takes us and where the next super popular vampire story will go. Okay, so I have pontificated long enough. Let's quickly catch up with some of the stuff you guys have written right here. And Shade, I'll get around again to what you were writing about Tsukihime. But first, this is relevant to me. I'm writing a vampire race in one of my stories. Awesome. Love to hear it. Only Nicolas Cage can play Dracula from now on. because of his time and because of his portrayal in Renfield. Nicolas Cage, holy cow, he's terrifying and awful as Dracula in Renfield. Five says, given a live alive based story, mine will be inherently connected to some sort of same evil that keeps popping up in different forms. Okay, cool. And Art says they think they've heard about Field of Vampires. Again, I highly recommend checking it out. I know most of this from analysis of the SNES games, talking about how much of it thematically fits for all of them to have the same boss theme. Mine would simply have a leitmotif all boss themes will have. I'm Omega says, and great to have you here, I'm Omega. One of the monster groups in Kamen Rider are the Fungiri, or I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, Fungire, which are technically daywalkers, but they are stained glass monsters who suck out the essence of a person rather than their blood, which makes them vampiric in definition. Kamen Rider Kiva, though I've yet to watch the same series, but Fungiris are a favorite monster group for me. Well, that's really cool. Darkest Daydream says, don't you mean Lucy Westerna? Lucy Westerna. Why do I feel I've heard the name before? Is that from Fairy Tale? But it says this explains a bit to me why some media vampires seem so bitter. A very good point. And Art says, great source of tension in your local community, the mere suspicion that someone may or may not be a vampire. Conan Doyle. Okay, I was wrong. LOL. Shade says, is human to be wrong? To be human is to err. To learn how to improve is to fulfill what it means to be human. I suppose Sherlock Holmes could be a vampire. That depends on the version of Sherlock Holmes. I would argue, though, no. By all definitions, regular Sherlock Holmes, in most iterations, is not a vampire. But a vampire version of Sherlock Holmes would be cool. Either a vampire Sherlock Holmes or Sherlock Holmes versus vampires. I would watch that or read it. Holy cow, that sounds awesome. No book talk. Oh, books. The books will be talked about. But stay away from book talk. Book talk is full of just bad suggestions that we don't need to get into. Still traumatized from reading these books. Okay, when you catch up to me, I will continue with the rest of Tsukihime. I have one vampire character I made with my ex-boyfriend, is what Dork Stage Dream says, when we were still together. I don't want to scrap her, so I'm going to reuse her for Wild Side. Awesome! Awesome. And that is a good thing to do, really, in so many different stories. You have an idea that maybe might not work in one story, but you realize that you have the opportunity to use that idea somewhere else and probably even to better effect. I really, really like that. To answer your question, Lucy is Mina's friend in the original Dracula novel. Awesome. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that for me, Dorcas Daydreams. And then Schlock Holmes or Schlockums. Robert Downey Jr. version, definitely. I love Robert Downey Jr. as Sherlock Holmes. I says Robert Downey Jr. would definitely be a great vampire. He would be. He's such a cool actor. Okay, so let me then quickly catch up then with Tsukihime, which is up here. Okay, let's begin. Typically, vampires in Tsukihime are two types of vampires. First, true ancestors, and second, dead parcels. The origin of vampires in Tsukihime type moon, the name of the ultimate being of the moon, make a deal with Earth to create the hunter for humanity to make sure humans will not destroy the planet. But when they created the true ancestors, they make an accident. They make them crazy for human blood. If they drink it, they become fallen ancestors, basically evil and crazy. That's some good lore right there. Okay, so to continue on, because we do need to come around to actually now quantifying a vampire. And here is what people would honestly be shocked to learn about, is that, well, vampires are actually kind of difficult to categorize, which is silly because when you look, it's like clearly this dude roaring on the set right here. This is or on this slide. That's a vampire. A vampire is a vampire is a vampire. Duh. But the reason why I say that they're hard to categorize and figure out is because once you dive into the mythology and fiction of vampires and all their different iterations, you'll find that there are loads of different vampires, but not all blood-sucking monsters are vampires. But vampirism is one of the most popular tropes or characteristics for horror creatures. So that's just something that we got to deal with. And so it takes a little bit of time to kind of parse out, okay, what exactly is a vampire and what just might be vampiric or might have some vampirism. Just because something might be vampiric doesn't necessarily make it a vampire. And so in order then to really boil it down across most mythology in world history, vampires, they consume life force. This often comes in sucking actual blood, but it can actually come in various ways as well. It's not anything new to have a vampire that doesn't suck blood. Sometimes they just suck the life and vitality out of you. Sometimes they suck out your good humor. Sometimes they suck out your soul, and rather than your blood. So vampires, so long as they're sucking out your life force in one form or another, that is common. If a vampire isn't doing that, they're not a vampire. Another thing that all vampires across all of mythology have is a certain kind of corruptive force. They either corrupt people through their unnatural presence, how they break the world order. They might bring death and disease in their wake. Their presence can make people sick. Or, as is now the more common way to view vampires, their corruption comes in the way that they mess around with people's minds, how they seduce them on over to their side so they can get a little nibble. In either case, it is a form of corruption. And kind of going hand in hand with that, but it is distinct, especially then when you get into the story of something like the Nosferatu, is that they act as a plague. They are very clearly unnatural. They go against the natural order, either by the mere fact that they live for so long, or because they take away from people, they suck out their life force in one way or another, or because of just other things that they do to the environment, how they just cause things to die, to rot, to decay. Darkness settles on the hearts and minds of the people around them. It goes against what you would expect of how the world and its people to work. Which, all of this very clearly makes it very frustrating to exactly nail down, okay, well, what is a vampire? What is a vampire? Because what I've just listed out right there is so general. It's so general. What makes a vampire? This is where something like Vampire the Masquerade actually comes in quite handy to take a hold of the main stereotypes of vampires and then shift them into families and factions with similar abilities or effects. And so, especially if you want to kind of get into, especially if you want to get into different interpretations of vampires that go along with what's more stereotypical, Vampire the Masquerade is not a bad place to begin. All right, let's see here. Catching up. Dorcas Adrian says, anyway, my character's name is Daria Bloodworth. Totally not on the nose name. She's a wealthy heiress who presents herself as elegant, but she's a dork behind closed doors. Nice. A dorkish vampire. So it's not entirely accurate to just call them monsters. Well, you know what? Vampires are monsters. And that's one of the things, like vampire, like a best good way of putting it is that all vampires are monsters, but not all monsters are vampires. It's frustrating. Like a mummy or a werewolf. Yeah, mummies and werewolves are monsters. Mummies and werewolves can even have vampiric abilities or desires, but doesn't make them a vampire. Iso says, and sometimes they suck out something else. I know a certain red-haired anime vampire girl. Oh, yes, indeed. Fabio, since I like playing with facts like that, hearing of vampires largely having no sun weakness before Dracula, I went, all right, what if mine does have a sun weakness, but others don't? He's just related to a line of people that started from someone who Dracula bit. That's a really cool line of thought, Fabio, and that's a great distinction between factions of vampires. Art says, should I not inquire further? Arts, yes. I says, yes, Arts, you should not. LOL, it's erotica. Thank you, anime. Thank you for bringing that to us. I'm 99% certain I know which red-haired vampire you're referring to, and yes. Do not go searching if you do not want to feel like, feel awful afterwards. All right, so catch up then with what Shade has been then saying here as well, hopefully still going on with Tsukihime. Now the second type of vampires, dead apostles. Dead apostles are humans who turn to vampires. They have different ranks. First, the lowest rank of dead apostles, basically a dead corpse / zombie. The creator of this creature needs to commanded or return to dead. After that, the second is a ghoul. The majority of people do not have the potential to become dead apostles, but if a high ranking that a parcel shows you, he could make you a dead parcel without going through transformation. After that, they became a knight. When a dead apostle became a knight, they considered by the creator a high asset, and the creator will be considered them separate from them because it like a children. And now we'll begin with the most important dead apostles. Then Fabio says, since I like playing, oh yeah, I already got that. So, your deviation with the Dracula, with someone who's a descendant of a victim that Dracula bit. Again, I really, really like that idea, Fabio. Oh, it's probably not Chibi Vampire. Star Drop Mellow, my mind was thinking about making a better version of Twilight. Star Drop Mellow, I like the idea. And here's the thing. I'm just going to quickly say this. We love to joke about how all these other stories are better love stories than Twilight. And yes, it's true. There's so many better stories out there than Twilight. Here's the thing. Writing a good romance is still difficult. It's not something that comes intuitively to people. So if you want to write a better love story with vampires than Twilight, you really, really need to understand what was it that made Twilight actually a bad romance, and not just Bella's a mouth breather who's just, oh, Edward, and that Edward's a stalker. I mean, already those are strikes against it. But it comes down to how Stephenie Meyer ultimately created a very awkward love triangle that really didn't have much going for it other than horniness on the part of the readers. The blindness of Bella was intentional, to become a vessel for the reader to just kind of insert themselves into her and just enjoy the rest of the story through her, which is kind of silly because, okay, we think that already we go along with the main characters of these stories to enjoy the stories through and with them. But Bella, much like many bland anime protagonists, are made a specific way so that way anyone can just enter in and just be like, I am that person, rather than considering Bella as her own individual. And yes, she does have her own individual character, her own history, her own likes and dislikes. The problem is that a lot of those character details are swallowed up in her obsession with Edward and with trying to portray how amazing Edward is and how he's the best guy for her. And so, yeah, that then begins opening up the doors even more about to why this doesn't work, because it's not so much a romance as it is just straight up wish fulfillment. And it's not the most grippingly written wish fulfillment. So something to think about then, Star Drop Mellow, as you're thinking about how you might write a better version of Twilight. Really dive into why Twilight doesn't work. Actually get into the nuts and bolts. By doing that, you'll be better able to assess, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, this is why it doesn't work. How can I improve that? So that there's something to think about. And as someone who honestly does not know Twilight as well as other people, I really can't say more than that. So I think that would actually be a fantastic discussion to have at a later time. Have people who really understand Twilight and really break it down why it doesn't work, and not be brutal and mean-spirited about it, but from a very analytical point of view. I think we could learn something really, really good. Fabi says, while it sounds cool, it kills me humorously that the music for each boss of this game I want is so stereotypical of each sort of villain. Organ music. Shade says, low dead apostles, after that the higher ranked dead apostles, and highest rank that apostles called dead apostle ancestors. We will enter a vampire society. In vampire society, dead apostles are ruled in a council, and the council only accepted dead apostle ancestors. And the only rule in vampire society, dead apostles ancestors cannot kill each other. What if apostles killed an ancestor? He could become an ancestor and join the council. Oh, hey, Common Craft Brazil is here. Hello, what did I miss? Well, you've missed me talking about Field of Vampires, breaking down, generally speaking, what vampires are, and why it's so frustratingly difficult to actually nail down what a vampire really is. Because, I mean, we can have a list of qualifications, we can have all these different stories and descriptors of vampires, but the thing is that the idea of what a vampire is actually so vast, and there's so many iterations and variations of them, that honestly, and here's the thing, for everyone who's like, this is how you write a vampire story, basically, the thing that you should take away from this writing lesson is, no. Because vampires are so vast in interpretation and application throughout history and fiction and mythology that you can make almost anything into a vampire so long as you hold true to certain qualifications of what actually makes a vampire. And then from there, making that vampirism, that vampire, actually meaningful to your story, which is what we're going to be getting into from this point on. Good drink of water. Comcraft says, yeah, I heard that nearly every culture had a vampire-like being. Absolutely. And we're about to get into that. Twilight is full of wish fulfillment. Many people love it because you can become the protagonist and a hard vampire. Love you, the majority of the target audience enjoy it. Comcraft says, there is a reason Vampire the Masquerade has a truckload of vampire clans and bloodlines. LOL. Yeah, because Vampire the Masquerade is trying to make sense of all these different iterations of vampires. And for people who really, really love vampire lore, it's a good game to get into, to learn even more and see how different people apply the lore of vampires, or at least the lore within the game. You are not bound to just what Vampire the Masquerade says. And believe you me, I have met people who are all like, if the vampire isn't like the vampires in Vampire the Masquerade, they can't be a real vampire, because Vampire the Masquerade is one of the best games, if not the best game ever made. I know that lots of people love it, and that love is solidified by a well-made game. But it is not the only way to represent vampires. Comcraft says, sorry for missing the last handful of streams. Insomnia is a jerk. Hey, Comcraft, you just got to take care of yourself. And that is absolutely fine. Like, you first take care of yourself. The streams are always up, so that way you can always come and watch them whenever you have the chance. I know that actually having the live experience is what makes this a whole lot more fun and enjoyable. But yeah, don't push yourself further than you need to, or that you can. And take care of yourself first. Fabio says the first YouTube result was D minor, and that's exactly where it was. last time I played it on keyboard. Oh, seriously, it starts by lightly following up a certain first few notes of toccata and fugue. The first YouTube result was D minor, and that's exactly where it was last time I played on the keyboard. Comcraft says, also for people that are interested in Vampire the Masquerade, there is a humble bundle for the entire currently available catalog of World of Darkness RPGs, all for $25. Money well spent for me personally. Hey, awesome. And that's a good recommendation for anyone who wants to get into this. Okay, Lars, I want you to tell me what to do. What do you think of Tsukihime Vampires? I did not tell you everything because it'll take 10 hours. This is just the surface. Sounds interesting to me. Yeah. Say it all depends on what you do with the story. And that's one of the things with monsters. There's a lot of very interesting monsters out there and some very fascinating lore, but it's the application to the story that makes them truly memorable. All right. So let us be like Bella and let's do some vampire research to see a little bit more about how the world over time has interpreted vampires, different kinds of vampire stories out there. And also I want you guys to judge, are these actually vampires? And this is something that you should do. If you're thinking of writing a story with vampires, you want to know what other people have done. So that way you know what you're going against the grain with, which is A-okay by me. I am someone who advocates for going against the grain, but also knowing what certain expectations people have. What are things that people have done that look really good? And what are some things that people have done with vampires you're like, actually, that's awful. Thank you for having done that, so that way I now don't have to do it. I have learned from your mistakes. So, in order to do that, we are going to share the screen. And this will then, of course, lead to the eternal swirl. So, eternal swirl time. There we go. Yeah, I got that. Okay. So, coming out of the eternal swirl. So, something that you should know about using Wikipedia. Your high school teachers and middle school teachers were correct when they said that you should not wholly rely on Wikipedia for everything that you research. But if you've gone to college, your college professors have probably said, use Wikipedia. Why use Wikipedia? Because it introduces you to a wealth of information and resources, the citations behind all of these writings that you can then go in and do even more research on your own beyond just what Wikipedia presents, because Wikipedia is always constantly being edited and might not always be edited in a way that actually gives you the correct information or all the information that you need. But the citations that are given can lead you to better sources that will give you what you're looking for. So Wikipedia is not a bad place to go for just the initial stage of research. That being said, let's start scrolling around here. This is a list of vampiric creatures in folklore. So we have from A to Z all the vampires that you could possibly want, or maybe not, because I know some people who just want so many vampires. So give me a letter. Where should we begin? And which along this list, A through Z, give me a letter, and we are going to start there. Comcast says, here in Brazil, we have a vampire called Corpo Seco, literally dry corpse in Portuguese. That is just a singular guy that was rejected from heaven and hell, and the earth spat out later. Oh, man, that's depressing. When no one likes you, and even the earth is like, just get out of me. And you're like, oh, man. roaming around forever. Actually, since you give me that, Corpo Seco, let's see if he's listed here. He is not. So we have, and this is again good evidence that Wikipedia doesn't always have everything. We have a monster, we have a vampire, Corpo Seco, that is not here on the list. Though maybe Capilobo? No, Capilobo is definitely not dry corpse. And see, here's an example. Well, we use this real quick as an example. So Capilopo is a theanthropic creature from Brazilian theology. What does that mean? It means that we've got a cursed humanoid animal with an elongated snout of a pig, dog, or a giant anteater, depending on region, as the legend is locally told in the states of Para or Maranhão. I probably totally mispronounced that, and I apologize. It is either beast-like or humanoid, like a Mapinguri, and stumpy-footed as well. So, I mean, here this sounds almost more like a werewolf than a vampire. And so, right here, similar entities, vampires and werewolves. So this is very clearly a creature who probably has more vampiric qualities than is actually a full-on vampire. Now then, this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because again, trying to differentiate, okay, so what actually makes a vampire a vampire? We'd have to start diving more into the Copilobo's backstory. The Copilobo is described as a hematophage, i.e. bloodsucker, and is likened to the werewolf. So we got more of a werewolf type creature. It's also known to snatch away newborn puppies and kittens from people's huts or encampments. And it reputedly crushes the victim with a deadly embrace, or otherwise breaks open the carotid artery to drink the victim's blood. So in this case, it then starts coming across as more vampiric, or inserts its snout or trunk into the embraced victim's head and sucks out their brain, its favorite food. The only way to defeat is by shooting in the navel, which is covered in long strands of fur, and the natives hesitate to take arrow shots at it. So, with this right here, this definitely sounds more like its own individual creature, which is A-okay. This is neat. This is interesting. But is it really a vampire? Which then should make you think, okay, why is it then under the category of vampire? This is again because, like I said, the umbrella or the categorization of what makes a vampire is just so broad. I mean, this is a bloodsucker. It takes away your life force. This is very clearly against the natural order. So it already fulfills two major criteria for what a vampire is. And by that account, one could indeed call it a vampire. Whereas others would say, no, it's very clearly its own monster. So I want to hear from you guys what your thoughts are. And I'm going to quickly catch up with your comments here. So Fabio says, oh, I haven't heard of Corpo Seco in my region. Conquer says, I read about Corpo Seco in a book, then forgot about him and stumbled on info about him later online and memorized it. I heard that in some places people believe that vampires are what werewolves become after death. That's actually a cool evolution right there. Conquer says, anyway, I've been wrestling between writing 3 different Vampire the Masquerade crossover ideas. That's cool. One of the alternative ones I hear about most are those Chinese ones that hop and stuff. Dragon Ball Z's Chiatsu is based on them. There's a Super Mario Land Game Boy enemy based on it, or based on them. Well, that's also really, really cool. I did not know that. So again, I'm not seeing people give me a letter to begin with, or their thoughts on this on this particular creature, the Cape Lobo. So let's then try out this guy here, the Churel. Ooh, and so it says closest thing we have to a vampire in Alaska folklore is Otterman. Otterman. Let's see if Otterman is here. And the O's. No, he's not here. So ISO, you're gonna have to fill us in, because that actually sounds that sounds really interesting. Start by G. All right, let's go with the G. Okay, so here we've got a series of vampire creatures, or vampire-like. We have the Kasha Dokuro, which is from Japan, the Kaistig, Scotland, the Jure Grando, which is from Croatia, or the Ghoul. And of course, there's all different variations of the Ghoul. It'll be interesting to see what's what kinds of information Wikipedia will throw our way if we dare click on Google. So we've got 4G vampires. Which one should we look at? Should we go looking at the Kashidakuro, the Gleistig, the Yoregrando, or the Ghoul? Let me know there in the chat, and we'll do some exploring into what these creatures are. And Comcraft says, thing I find hilarious. Thing I find hilarious is that here we have Corpe Seco, who has this whole thing. Then we have Lobisomen, which are literally just werewolves. Lobisomen is werewolf in Portuguese. All right. And then ISO says, Kushtaka. This shape-shifting creature is described as the land otterman in Tlingit and Haida folklore. It can transform between human and otter forms and is known for its trickster nature, luring unwary travelers to their death. Some stories portray the Kushtaka as a creature that can... and we'll get a little bit more here soon. Conquer says, I read once about the Psycha. I forgot the exact way it was written, but it began with a P. I lost it. Dang it. Where was I again? It interested me because it supposedly drives people mad, which reminded me of Malkavians from Vampire the Masquerade. Yeah, and Conquer says, yeah, I never heard about that Japanese one. Let's go with that. All right, the Gasha Dokuro. Okay, so we got 2 votes for that one. And while we wait for ISO to tell us more about this Ottoman, let's see what we got here. Okay. Oh, that's a cool picture. Let's quickly blow that one on up. That is awesome. I don't know how many of you have seen Bleach Hellverse, but this is immediately what I think of. The great guardians of hell, or these giant skeletons that just smash and stab people if they try to escape hell. All right, the Gasha Dokuro, literally rattling skeleton, also known as Odokuro, are mythological creatures in modern Japanese mythology. The Gashidokuro is a spirit that takes the form of a giant skeleton made of the skulls of people who died in the battlefield or of starvation and famine. While the corpse becomes a Gashidokuro, the spirit becomes a separate yokai known as a Hirarugami. And this is 10 or more meters tall. Only the eyes protrude, and some sources describe them as burning yellow or green. Gashidokuro wanders around 2 a.m. and attacks and eats people when it sees them. When a Gashidokuro approaches, it is said to make a clattering sound with its teeth, gachi gachi. However, they are also known to be stealthy when approaching humans they wish to eat. The following characteristics are not confirmed by Japanese data. The Gashidokuro are said to possess the powers of invisibility and indestructibility since it is composed of the bones of people who are already deceased, though Shinto charms are said to ward them off. Otherwise, a Gashidokuro will continue to hunt its prey until its pent-up anger is released, causing the bones to crumple and the Gashidokuro to collapse. So, this is really interesting right here. At least this is a very interesting monster. Don't yet know if this is really a vampire. We'll have to do a little bit more digging to figure out if that is actually the case. All right, so we got a little bit more here from ISO about because I really want to get to this about the Otterman. It is a fearsome being that can appear as the human or a regular otter. I already got that. Kushtaka are also known for their intelligence and mischievous nature, sometimes mimicking sounds like a crying child or woman to draw in victims. Man, that's creepy. Also, Lars, you should check the Wikipedia entry for the classic European vampire. It is nothing like a pop culture vampire. Oh, I know. Believe me, I know. Not me imagining someone purposely going to full JoJo on a ghoul. Jotaro going ham on a ghoul. So specific, LOL, 2 a.m. I imagine the modern day is now the natural predator of 3 a.m. YouTubers. That could make a really interesting anime episode in a horror anime. All right, so here we then have a story about one of these people, the modern culture. So right here, the mythology. One of the first known myths of the Gashadokuro dates back to the 10th century when it took part in a semi-historical account. During that century in Japan, Taira no Masakado, a prominent samurai from the Kanto region, was ambushed one day by 3 of his cousins due to quarreling over marriages. Enraged by this, Masakado retaliated by burning down their residence, killing one of his uncles, Kunika. Taira no Yoshimasa, who was either Masakado's parental uncle or cousin, wanted to avenge Kunika and challenged Masakado to a duel. Upon losing the duel, Yoshimasa, embarrassed by his defeat, called upon Taira no Yoshikana, another one of Masakado's relatives, who fought over the same woman. Yoshikane, who was the assistant governor for Kazusa province, was easily able to gather many warriors and officials from his province. On the day of their battle, Masakado, despite only having around 100 poorly equipped soldiers, was able to inflict heavy casualties. So we got some cool battles and whatnot going here, but really not a whole lot about, again, vampires or even this creature. But this already gives us an idea, coming back to our early lessons on monsters this month, about how monsters and ghost stories are related to real world things, real world fears that people have, or real world events. So we got a little bit more here for its more modern versions, but it doesn't seem to be a creature, at least anywhere that I'm scanning, says that this is something that drinks blood. It just seems to be an undead creature, or a creature that's created from the bodies of the dead. So basically here, I don't even know why this is considered a vampire. It's interesting. I definitely would not call it a vampire. So again, this is where it becomes very important to honestly take your time and go through, okay, what makes a vampire and what doesn't. We have come across some very interesting monsters, absolutely, and I bet that in the proper context, they're absolutely spooky. And these are not vampires. So this is why doing your research into vampires is so important. Now, let me then have a quick look right over here at the Gleistig, just to kind of get an idea. Gleistig is a ghost from Scottish mythology, a type of Thoth, or faith, or fae, is also known as Magdalene Une, the Green Maiden, and may appear as a woman, a beauty, or monstrous mien, as a half woman, half goat, similar to a faun or satyr, in the shape of a goat. All right, so here we have, again, another really interesting creature, but I'm not seeing... wait. Ooh, here we are. The Gleistig is an ambivalent ghost that appears in legend as both a malicious and benign creature. Some stories have her luring men to her lair via either song or dance, where she would then drink their blood. So, we have some vampirism right here, and now this makes a little bit more sense why she's on the list. Other tales have her casting stones in the path of travelers or throwing them off course. Okay, I am going to tell you guys this, from having gone on a hike up in northern Scotland all by myself at like 5 a.m. in the morning when it was cold, windy, and rainy. Let me tell you this, you see weird things out there in the wilds of Scotland. And I can absolutely believe where some of this might have come from, because just reading this immediately, like thinking about, like, okay, where would this have come from? Oh, I now know. I have a good idea of where this would come from, this particular legend, just naturally. And yeah, it is genuinely spooky. You want to kind of freak yourself out? Go hiking in Upper Scotland all alone really early in the morning. It is a different world. All right. But this seems to be more of like a ghost or a fairy, a fae, rather than, again, your typical vampire. There's some vampire qualities to her, but again, I really wouldn't consider this consider this particular monster to be a vampire. So where have all the good vampires gone? All right, Telly Goodman's here. Glitch Productions is almost having 17 million subs. Well, great for them. They're doing really well. I also have a video that I hope to release tomorrow, building on the conversation from the last live stream about what this contract, about what the new deal with Lackadaisy could potentially mean going forward. And I hope that you guys check that out, even if you have listened to my rant from the last live stream. Five says, even though it ain't 5 a.m. in the morning, it is like hearing ATM machine. Wait, what? I think I'm missing something right here. I guess not. Common Care says, Lars, look for Lamia. Apparently, at some point in Greek mythology, it was the name for a species of beings rather than individual, and it drinks blood. All right, let's look that up. Empusa 2, another Greek vampire. Wow, finally a more conventional vampire. And it says, Lars lore unfolds. Yes, right after I quit being a teacher, I went to Scotland with my sister. She was doing a photo shoot, and I got to explore the Highlands. And wow, so cool, so very different from anything I've experienced before. I went to the Old Man on Store. Oh, that was such a cool experience, and I thought I was going to die a couple of times. All right, so let's see here. Let's check out from our recommendations right here. Let's see if the Lamia arrives right here. Here we are. So Lamia from Libya. All right, so what we have here with the Lamia? We got our snake woman. Oh, my good Christian sir. No, don't do it. Don't go kissing the snake woman. That's what I want to do. Wait, what? So, Lamia was a child-eating monster, and later tradition was regarded as a type of night-haunting spirit or demon. In the earliest myths, Lamia was a beautiful queen of ancient Libya who had an affair with Zeus and gave birth to his children. Upon learning this, Zeus's wife Hera robbed Lamia of her children, either by kidnapping them or hiding them away, killing them outright, or forcing Lamia to kill them. All very Hera things to do. The loss of her children drove Lamia insane, and she began hunting and devouring others' children. Either because of her anguish or her cannibalism, Lamia was transformed into a horrific creature. Zeus gifted Lamia the power of prophecy and the ability to take out and reinsert her eyes, possibly because Hera cursed her with insomnia or the inability to close them. Oh man, isn't just Zeus and Hera. If you are going to survive and thrive in a Greek myth, what you need to do is you need to hightail it to the underworld as fast as possible, find Hades, become friends with Hades. Don't try to steal away his wife, because then horrible things are going to happen to you. Just become friends with Hades, and you are good. Hades is going to take care of you. If you can't get Hades to take care of you, make friends with Hermes. Hermes is also usually a pretty good god, but he does some more messed up stuff than Hades does. So, the Lamai also became a type of phantom, synonymous with the Empusi. Yeah, I pronounced that right. The Empusi who seduce young men to satisfy their sexual appetite and fed on their flesh afterwards. An account of Apollonius of Tiana's defeat of a Lamia seductress inspired the poem Lamia by John Keats. Lamia have been ascribed serpentine qualities, which some commentators believe can be firmly traced to mythology from antiquity. They have found analogues in ancient texts that could be designated as Lamia, which are part snake beings. These include the half-woman, half-snake beasts of the Libyan myth, told by Dio Chrysostom, and the monster sent to Argos by Apollo to avenge Passamate, daughter of King Kratopos. Man, it's been a long time since I've had to exercise my Greek. So, interesting creatures. And again, we definitely get some vampiric qualities to them, but they're not necessarily vampires. Now, here's the thing though. Thinking about where we're going to take this, how you can start making your own vampires going forward. all of these creatures are actually a good starting point to maybe even create your very own vampires. Imagine if you had, imagine this. So let's think of the Lamia here for a brief moment. And you could very well put this into a story. You've got this young man, he goes to college, he's living in the dorms. There's this beautiful girl in the co-ed dorms. All the guys just feel absolutely drawn to her. All the girls roll their eyes. Well, at parties, the guys that she makes out with either suddenly have something really bad happen to them or they vanish. Or maybe they're found really bloody later on, and she then looks even more healthy and beautiful later. She's been drinking their blood. And the main character only finds out later on when he resists her charms because, well, for whatever reason, maybe he found the girl of his dreams or something else happened, who knows. But he discovers what's going on, but she's like, no, I will have to destroy you. And so she transforms fully into her more snake-like self. At other points in the story, you might have seen the fangs come out. He might have even caught her drinking a guy's blood as he's knocked out at a party. But when she realizes that she's got to kill this guy, she goes full on snake form. And then we get her like sliding through the ventilation shaft, popping out at places where you least expect her, using her tail to wrap around him and yank him across the room or throw him across the room before she then tries crushing him to then devour him. Like, there's things you can do with this and make it feel like a vampire story until it's revealed truly what she is. Or you can just say that she is yet an evolution or a type of vampire that just happens to have those particular kinds of qualities. Or you can just, or again, you can just say like, ooh, it was a vampire story until you realize it's actually a Lamia and they're their very own thing. So you have a lot of leeway. You have a lot of creative freedom in how you wish to present any one of these monsters and utilize them in a vampire or vampire-like story. Then let's see here. Star Trek Mel says, "Oh man, I probably should take a nap. I'm not as motivated as I used to." Hey, Star Trek Mel, if you need to drop on out, that's absolutely fine. But thank you for being here. And if you feel like just popping back in later on because the nap isn't quite working, we'd love to have you back. Common Craft Brazil says, "I think there is more info down the page about the Lamia." Oh yeah, there definitely is. If we pop back on over here. So we have the demythologized, the genealogy, the Aristophanes, a children's boogeyman as a seductress, Lamia the courtesan. Oh, very interesting. The golden ass. So there are loads of different ways that, again, a creature like a Lamia can be taken and that things that you can do with it. So very, very interesting. Yeah, there's a lot. So potential research that you can then easily draw on to help you write a really cool story if you wish to use a Lamia creature. You don't have to go the route of anime where it's like, Snake Girl must be sexy. Will smash. You don't always have to go that route. Fabio says, it's that where ATM and already ends in machine, so you're repeating yourself an ATM machine. Hey, you know what? We absolutely do that. And that's A-okay. Machine. It's machine squared. All right, Star Trek Mel, thanks to you, everyone. Hey, Star Trek Mel, thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a good night and good rest. All right, then there was one other suggestion for a vampire with an E. And I do not see it. Oh, there we are, the Impusa. All right. The Impusa is a shape-shifting female being in Greek mythology, said to possess a single leg of copper, commanded by Hecate, whose precise nature is obscure. In late antiquity, the Impusae have been described as a category of phantoms or specters, equated with the Lamia and Mormolaikia, sought to seduce and feed on young men. The Impusa was defined in the Sudas and by Crates of Malice as a demonic phantom with shape-shifting abilities. Interesting. The Impusa is also said to be one-legged, having one brass leg or a donkey's leg. Oh, that kind of sucks. Thus being known by the epithets of onokole or the onoskeles, which both mean donkey-footed. A folk etymology construes the name to mean one-footed. So this is, I mean, that would be really weird to come across. Not sure if I would exactly be seduced by a woman who's just hopping along on one donkey's leg. I am not that desperate for a girlfriend. Now then, while eating a person could be considered vampiric, again, this is a creature that doesn't really seem to be all that vampire-y. However, could be a very interesting idea for a messed up thrall for a vampire. Say, just again, kind of depend on what you would like to do with this particular idea, if you wish to use the idea of Impusa within a vampire story. All right. Remember, Lars, the Impusa is a shapeshifter, which, I mean, is really, really cool, but shapeshifting is not always necessarily a vampire ability. It's a cool monster ability, but it's not always inherently a vampire ability. I says they drink blood because they see it as sacred, because it binds them to their god, who is actually a demon who sees the vampires as proxies for its will. Oh, okay. Sorry if I missed the first part. The vampires I'm writing are just people with a strange demonic-inspired culture. They drink blood because they see it as sacred, because it binds them to their god, who is actually a demon who sees the vampires as a proxy for its will. That's a really cool idea, and also really kind of messed up when it's just normal people who just happen to be really, really sick in the head or following a demon that encourages them to do something so awful. And then Fabio says, I'm just imagining some sort of movie cop-out where they only vaguely say vampire, but then it's like the were-ant-eater thing. Concrete says, I meant no, I meant in the sense of you not being that desperate for a girlfriend. Okay. So the Impusa shapeshifts, so she then has two legs. Well, now I'm a little bit more interested. Two donkey-legged woman. Now we're talking. Oh, again, well, I'm not that desperate. If the dating apps just stateside don't work, I'll make my way on over to Greece and start looking for mythological women who will probably eat me. Okay, let's try one more. Let's try one more possible vampire, and then we'll move on from there, because I think we've spent enough time bandying about in variations of what could be a vampire. And again, here's a good example of Wikipedia might not always be your best source, but it's definitely a place to go where you can start your research and find out some interesting things. So here we have the faux follet. Redirects here. So, Mexico has equivalents. Folklore explains the phenomenon to be witches transformed into these lights. Another explanation refers to the lights as indicators to places where gold or hidden treasures are buried, which can be found only with the help of children. In this one, they are called luces del dinero, money lights, or luces del tesoro, treasure lights. The swampy area of Massachusetts, known as the Bridgewater Triangle, has folklore of ghostly orbs of light. There have been modern observations of these ghost lights in this area as well. The faux follet of Louisiana derives from the French. The legend says that the faux follet is a soul sent back from the dead to do God's penance, but instead attacks people for vengeance. While it mostly takes part in harmless, mischievous acts, the faux follet sometimes sucks the blood of children. Some legends say it was the soul of a child who died before baptism. This right here, this variation of these ghost lights from Louisiana, this could make a very, very Oh, this could make a very interesting vampire that you could set in kind of the backwaters of Louisiana with some of like the Cajun influence. Maybe if you want to delve into voodoo or what have you. But you can do something really interesting with this. Imagine if you have these vampires who transform into orbs of light, and from far away, maybe you just think that they're just fireflies. And so you don't really think anything about it until it's too late and they come up really close. You're like, that's a big orb of light, transforms into a person, bites down you, sucks your blood. They go and they kidnap children. And so you could have this very, very interesting ethereal vampire-like monster that you're like, how are you supposed to find this thing? Because it can just transform into an orb of light and fly away. It blends in with the natural background. And you don't know it's there until it's too late. That could make a really, really fantastic vampire to go against. And because it can transform into an orb of light, maybe it influences other little fireflies around it, or the ethereal beauty it's able to conjure beckons young children into the swamps where they are then swallowed up and lost, and people just think they got lost in the swamps and probably got eaten by an alligator. But no, it was the faux follet that did it. So that definitely feels more like a potential vampire. It's not your straight up typical vampire, which is absolutely okay because there's so many takes on vampires. But this is the basis, I think, for a very interesting regional kind of vampire that you could actually sell. You could say, yes, this is a vampire. I know the legends say this, but what if we leaned a little bit more into the vampirism? I think you could do something really, really cool with this. Let's see, you're catching up. So try the Jiangxi. That one I have some familiarity with. In some places in Brazil, there's a tale of a creature similar, Mãe de Ouro, Mother of Gold, a woman that can turn into a light and points out a location of gold and also saves women from abusive guys. Doesn't sound actually too bad. And she goes ahead and sucks the blood of those abusive guys. I'm all for that. Fire says, I was confused about the one I mentioned's name because Cape Lobo, yet the image is of an anteater variant and doesn't even mention the name, just makes me think of capybaras. Exactly, yeah, the Cape Lobo is just like kind of like, huh, okay, yeah, capybara or an anteater, a were capybara or a were anteater. Yeah, definitely feels more like a werewolf variant rather than a straight up vampire. But let's check out this Jiangxi, and then we will move on with our lesson. So if I then pop back on over here, let's see if we got the Jiangxi. And for anyone who has been caught up in the craze of K-pop demon hunters, I mean, here's a similarity. I mean, it's not the exact same thing. China and Korea, two distinct cultures, but yeah, we see some similarities right there. Okay, the Jiangxi, and because pronouncing anything in Chinese is difficult for anyone who hasn't studied it, I've already probably butchered the name. Is also known as a Chinese hopping vampire. It is a type of undead creature or reanimated corpse in Chinese legends and folklore. Due to the influence of Hong Kong cinema, it is typically depicted in modern popular culture as a stiffened corpse dressed in official garments from the Qing dynasty. Although the pronunciation of Jiangxi varies in different East Asian countries, all of them refer to the Chinese version of vampire. In popular culture, is commonly represented as hopping or leaping. In folkloric accounts, however, it is more formidable, capable of giving chase by running, and if sufficiently ancient, or if it has absorbed sufficient yang energy, capable also of flight. According to folkloric understanding, Jiangxi came from the hills, soaring through the air to devour the infants of the people. In both popular culture and folklore, it is represented either as anthropophagus, i.e. man-eating, therefore resembling Eastern European vampires, or as killing living creatures by absorbing their ki or life force. It is usually not represented as a blood-sucking creature as in Western conception. So here again is an excellent example of what I said earlier on, that vampires are life force sucking or consuming. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have to suck blood, but that they take lives in some kind of way. During the day, it rests in a coffin or hides in the dark places such as caves and forests. So here we have your more typical depiction of a vampire. But here we have a take that has been colored by the particular culture that it comes from. In this case, China. And so it will have its own unique abilities and backgrounds. But yeah, this definitely fits what we're looking for. It is life-consuming. It is unnatural. It is a plague or a corrupting force on the land or the people that is around. It's got all the qualities. This is a creature that definitely fits what we would think of in terms of a vampire. And again, kind of thinking back to K-pop Demon Hunters, this is what the boy band ultimately is when they show their true selves. And that works out really well because they are sucking away the souls of the Demon Hunters fans. So, very good use of vampires, I would say. Hey, you want K-pop Demon Hunters? Go looking into the Josong Saja. There's a reason they called themselves Saja Boys. Awesome. Yay. I saw the connection. Mother of Gold is not a vampire. It's just similar in the sense of being a type of ghost light. Ah, okay. Gotcha. Now I understand. Okay, so I hope that right there kind of then gives you an idea of what you can do when, again, researching different kinds of vampires. Some are definitely very clearly your more stereotypical vampire. Others, are these really vampires? But they make for some interesting horror stories that, as we see with the Lamia or with the Faux Follet, you might be able to guide those a little bit easier into your typical vampire story or into a variation of a vampire story. All right, back to the Eternal Swirl. Let us stop that with the sharing of the screen. We shall then return. K-pop Demon Hunters was a good movie. After 10,000 years, you set it different cultures and check the ghoul and Middle Eastern creatures. Well, we don't really right now have the time. I want to move on. I want to move on to what comes next. But absolutely check out the ghoul and check out more Middle Eastern creatures. See which ones might be vampiric or even straight up vampires. All right. Making your own vampire. Now then, if you want to create your very own variation of vampires, like for instance what ISO and Fabio are doing, here are some things to consider in terms of being able to help you to fully flesh out these creatures and to make sure that people realize that they are vampires without having to fall into basic stereotypes. Consider the following. What do your vampires look like? Now, this is kind of important right here because people have kind of now this preconception of what vampires are. And thanks to stuff like Twilight and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, Interview with the Vampires, Vampire the Masquerade, people see vampires now a very specific kind of way. But what if your vampires looked very different? And that's A-okay. You can describe them as looking very different. But you then need to be able to still identify them as vampires, which then leads us to what kinds of abilities do they have? What are the cultures that these vampires might have created for themselves? What's their history? What are their histories? And how does their presence affect those around them? And most importantly, what role do the vampires play within your stories? I'm just going to give a very brief example right here of a lost opportunity. In the Harry Potter book series, there is a moment where a vampire is brought onto Hogwarts grounds, which I don't know if Dumbledore would exactly approve of that, but it's really neat because there's a vampire. And you think like, okay, so what exactly is going to happen then with this vampire? Nothing really happens other than that he begins to slightly bewitch two teenage girls, but it's played off for more as a joke. It's literally 2 sentences and that's it. And it's like, wait, J.K. Rowling, you have a vampire on Hogwarts. You could do stuff with this, but she never does. If you're going to introduce a vampire into your story, even if the vampires aren't central monsters or central villains or central protagonists, vampires should have an effect on the story because that is what vampires do. Vampires exude an influence, usually a very corrupting influence on those around them, which is why it's important to understand that. Fire says, I remember hearing of the Muppets count being based on what known modern vampires come from, having a compulsion to count things. So, like, flee by distracting them by dropping pennies. Count all the pennies I'm currently dropping. I will count them. That's 1 penny, 2 pennies, 3 pennies. Give me more. Oh, give me more. And I will count them to 4 pennies, 5 pennies. And meanwhile, you're already off like a quarter of a mile away. J.K. Rowling said the reason she never explored vampires is because the other stories already explored them. LOL. That's a cop-out. If you introduce a vampire into the story, do something with the vampire. She didn't. Wasted opportunity. Exactly. I hate that. The people wanted her take on them. I want her take on them. Shay says, I agree and disagree. Depends on the type of vampires. Your ideas are correct, but types of vampires, they exist, and they're not very dangerous to humanity. Depends on the type of vampire. But again, the influence that they have an influence. Vampires are not vampires unless they have a kind of influence. And what's really neat about good takes on vampires, and really the revolutionary takes on vampires, is the kind of influence that they exude. Here is actually something, so I know I've torn into Twilight a little bit, but let me actually pay Stephenie Meyer some compliments. The Valturi were an amazing example of how vampires can exude influence that is almost unseen until you realize what it is. And the Valturi, their influence is political. They do not want the human population to become anything other than their very easy, accessible blood bank. The Valturi have a system set up that allows them to easily get humans to feed on. If that system is disrupted by the knowledge of vampires becoming public, all of their influence and power and their ease of life that allows them to indulge in all of their desires goes out the window. And so the Valturi, their corrosive influence is a political one, using their power of connections, money, and accumulated special abilities from various vampires in order to hold all the other vampire clans in check. That is their corrosive influence. One could argue that it's a good one because it, again, keeps the vampire clans in check. But as we see through the experiences of the Collins family, that this kind of influence is incredibly pervasive. And basically the Valturi haunts the people who they wish to collect. They want to rob powerful vampires of their autonomy and include them into their little gang, so that way they can continue to live life to their version of the fullest. And so all the other vampire clans are held under their thumbs. They're only allowed to exist effectively. And if they have someone in their clan who's very powerful, they are basically pressured into giving that individual up to the Valturi, thereby weakening their clan so the Valturi can always remain in power. That aspect of Twilight, in my opinion, was well written. That was a good invention on the part of Stephenie Meyer in terms of the influence that vampires can have on the world around them. All right, honey, I get it. All right, we're letting you out. Be free, fat cats. The fat cat has been freed. All right. So let's see here. Concraft says, like, she only explored werewolves because they weren't sufficiently explored at the time. Like, if werewolves were more popular, Professor Lupin would never have been written. Possibly. I would argue that werewolves were already pretty well explored in mythology. It's just that she had a very specific take for her werewolf, which is a-okay. It is a-okay to do. But again, if you're going to introduce a vampire, at least do something more than 2 sentences with that vampire. Fabi says this influence thing fits right in with an ancient evil that two multiple forms over the years story. Concrest says, that is why I want to write a crossover between Vampire the Masquerade and Harry Potter, especially with the Tremor and Banu Hakim, 2 clans of blood magic wielding vampires, with the Tremor being originally a cabal of wizards that turned themselves into vampires thanks to a botched immortality ritual and lost their original magic, which the new Tremor generations, more often than not, are even ignorant of ever having. That is the canon lore of the Tremor. Imagine wizards happily ignoring and denying wands to the Tremor just like they do with goblins. Interesting. Ooh. So you've got definitely fertile ground to work with right there, Common Craft. Now, let me take another drink of water here. Good stuff. Okay, so let's have a look now at some examples. Just to really kind of take this point home of what you can do with vampires that can be very interesting, maybe buy a little bit into the stereotypes, but again, take it in a direction that you wish to go. There is a manga series called Please Give Me Your Blood, I Will Serve You in Gratitude. This is a story about basically a washed out vampire at an academy for vampires who finds herself this hunky guy who just happens to have very delicious blood. And you would think, based on the setup, you're like, I know this kind of story. This is going to go in naughty directions. However, it ends up going into some really, really cool places, as effectively what happens is that the vampires, beginning with Sumeri, the very first one who encounters the big dude, is like, Wait a second. We hunt humans for their blood. That's what we do. However, what if we had humans who were willing to share their vitality with us? To which the older vampires say, look, there are weird humans who would do that, but it's an arrangement that will never last long term. On top of that, we need to consume quite a bit of blood to survive. You can't just partially suck on a human and then hope to survive. You will weaken over time. You must kill your victim. What Sumeri discovers is that if you have a strong connection with the human whose blood you're drinking, you actually only need to devour a little bit of blood, because the blood communicates the wholesomeness and power of your relationship. And so you're able then to survive off of even less blood. And so you then have other vampires who decide that they are going to put this into practice. And so you then have 2 factions of vampires, which ends up then actually evolving into 3 factions of vampires later on down the road. You have the vampires who are part of the old guard who are like, no, you must kill your victims because you need to consume all the blood possible, otherwise you're going to die. And then these other vampires are like, no, start good relationships with people and you will only need to consume a little bit of blood. And then this human you don't have to kill as many humans. And in fact, then by making friends with these humans, it makes it easier for us to integrate ourselves into human society. Because these vampires, though they can assume more human form, they have always been shunned because when you see them in their pure vampire form, they are obviously not human. They have all different kinds of weird wings sticking out at weird angles. They have a very clear weapon-like tail. And there's just this very ominous aura and presence about them that weakens their victims. And so the vampires really can't be in human society. They've then created their own dimension where they then come out of to hunt their victims, because if they were just around normally, their influence would be too much for humans to handle. Except for when they develop good relationships with those humans. So Spooooky basically starts killing multiple birds with one stone. The thing is, this is where the third faction of vampires comes in, because vampires do not want humans to come after them. If it becomes common knowledge that vampires are hunting humans, humanity will unite against an enemy that they thought was just folklore, and will then launch a war against the vampires. So the vampires need to keep their existence hush hush, otherwise it means war, and that could lead to all kinds of problems down the line. They don't want that. So this means that the vampires have been regulating how many people get to go and hunt humans and how much blood comes into vampire society, which creates a difference between the haves and the have-nots. The third faction that comes into the story later on are the have-not vampires, and the have-not vampires are just wild brutes who utilize their abilities to just not only go after humans, but to kill other vampires, because they will take any blood. They will even drink the blood of fellow vampires to sustain themselves. And so this creates a really, really interesting story. It starts off as a bit of a rom-com, and then it begins going wild and going places. So give me your blood, I will serve you in gratitude. I definitely recommend it as an interesting read, especially if you want to see a cool take on vampires. Yeah, it's got all your shonen trappings, and if you've ever read Sugoya's works before, you will recognize the kinds of tropes that Sugoya wishes to use. But still, if you're looking into an interesting vampire story, I highly recommend it. And again, this story really does address all these things right here. Like, how do the vampires look? How do they affect other people? You get to learn about their culture, their society, their history. Again, the factions between the haves and the have-nots. You have the different orders of vampires that secure the order between the different dimensions, who go hunting rogue vampires, what is expected of vampires, a vampire academy to help vampires do what they need to do in order to survive. All of that's in there. And what is their importance to the story? Well, these vampires are trying to figure out really how to survive going forward. And the love story that's at the center of it begins to change vampire society, as these vampires realize that there is another way of doing their work to even survive that does not require murder. So it's really neat. It's really neat to see. Conquest says, wait, the vampires in this manga, are you talking about, aren't they basically succubi that don't know they're succubi? Well, hear it now then. Again, interesting. What's the difference right here? Because succubi and incubi definitely fall into this vampiric category. However, the main difference between a succubus and an incubus versus a vampire is that vampires do not need sexual acts to absorb life force. Succubi and incubi must do the deed. They must have sex in order to consume life force. That is what they are from top to bottom. Their seductive powers might make it seem like they're already drawing life force from their victims, but ultimately it's always about they got to do the deed in order to absorb the power. They might look vampiric, they might act vampiric, but their nature of how they get that life force, how they kill, is incredibly significant. This comes back again to what I was saying earlier about how vampires are monsters, but not all monsters are vampires. Which, I mean, sounds a bit like a duh, but when you think about the categories or the qualifications of vampires, succubi and incubi seem like they would straight up be vampires. What separates them from vampires is that they have a very, very specific way to kill and gain life force. Vampires are far more nuanced and can have various ways in which they absorb life force. So within the story, especially with the way that they're depicted, sometimes they might come across as succubi and incubi. However, because they do not need sexual acts in order to get blood, they're just there to suck the blood. And by having positive relationships with the humans, what you learn is that romance isn't necessarily needed. The vampires with the little girl, yeah, he's not thinking anything dirty. Like, that's actually a huge part of the story. He's like, I am not thinking anything dirty. I just want to see if I can have a good relationship with this girl, and if that will then mean I can survive off of her blood. And he actually says, I'm doing the hard thing, because if a vampire can develop a good relationship with an innocent little kid, that proves that this can work. And then the vampire that you see off to the far right, the one who looks more demonic, she's like, I'm going to choose a guy who I know is going to lust after my body, and I'm never going to give him a single taste. And try to basically see how that colors the relationship. And so it gets, and so it's nuanced, it's interesting, it goes places, but it never goes that particular route, which again divorces them from what we consider of your typical succubi and incubi, firmly rooting them as vampires because of how they get their life force from their victims, or in this case, their willing participants. Fabi says, actually an optimal thing to biologically do, but never culturally discovered. Always makes me think of Dragon Ball's Saiyans. The purer your heart, the more S cells you have, the easier you become Super Saiyan. Shay says, are vampires a separate race in humans? What I mean, vampires have children, or they turn humans to vampires vampire. So, Shay, that all depends on the lore of the particular vampire. For instance, if you watch Van Helsing, the one with Hugh Jackman, vampires cannot have kids, or at least kids that are born alive, which is why they need to get Frankenstein's monster in order to reverse the miracle of life, in order to bring all of these undead children to life. That's the central plot of Van Helsing. There are variations of vampires who are able to have children. There are then those vampires who can't have children, which is why they need to turn people by drinking their blood and turning them into thralls, and then later on to full vampires. It just always depends on the story. Hotel Transylvania, Dracula and his wife have a daughter. Vampires can have kids in that one. Again, Van Helsing, if they have children, they're dead. They need to somehow be brought to life. In Castlevania, vampires can have kids, but they almost never do because of just the weird nature of vampires and their typical solitary life that we see them normally lead, and their lust for more power rather than for necessarily procreating. Whereas, you just have all different kinds of takes on vampires, and all of which are okay, to be all honest. That's the thing, there's no one right or wrong way to do a vampire. Just so long as it's very clear that what you have on your hands in the story is a vampire. Comic says, I meant that vampires in this manga you're talking about, they drink blood better if they bond with their victim. So going out and bonding with people to drink blood better is just a few steps away from being a succubi or incubi, except it goes both ways rather than being one-sided. And you can definitely interpret it that way. Like, it definitely has some shades of what a succubus or an incubus would do. But I would highly recommend that you try out reading the story, and then you might be able to better see what I mean about like how that's a very clear and distinct difference that separates these two vampiric races of creatures. What a vampire is versus what a succubus is. All right. Now then, Blademancer, as much as I'd love to say that you could go ahead and read Blademancer, you can't, because I haven't yet written it. But this is a story idea that I've had for a while now with vampires, where it's like, okay, then, what I want to do with vampires? In this case, vampires just look like any old regular person. They do. You can't tell that they're a vampire unless they reveal it to you, which makes people really, really not like vampires because it's difficult, again, to tell. However, within the story of Blademancer, most vampires are very proud of the fact that they are superior to humans, and they have definitely formed societies, clans, even small kingdoms around being vampires. They're very, very proud of that, with the exception of a few who are like, I hate being a vampire. But most are absolutely A-okay with it. Now, what abilities do they have? In Blademancer, the vampires don't suck blood, they suck out souls. By consuming souls, they absorb, at least for a brief amount of time, the capabilities and knowledge of their victims. which is very important for the Blade Mancers, because Blade Mancers, their special magical swords that they use, are forged from souls. And so they then basically are wielding a soul, kind of similar to how a vampire would initially use a soul, except vampires, once they've consumed a soul, the power that they gain from that soul is fleeting, much like eating food. You eat food, you're empowered, you're strong, but eventually you process that food and then you need more food. Same with vampires. Vampires need to constantly be consuming souls, and they only retain for a short amount of time the power of that particular soul. Whereas for Blade Mancers, they have the power of that soul trapped in the blade, and as so long as that blade exists, you can always call on the power of the soul within that blade, and the souls compound. So as the generations go on, as opposed to vampires, Blade Mancers can compound, kind of similar to All Might, the power of each soul that uses the blade as it goes on, which makes the Blade Mancers, in a way, their own version of vampire, just they don't need to consume souls directly from other people in order to have that kind of power. So the vampires have the ability to consume souls. Now, when they consume souls from people and they create this husk, the husks might start turning into thralls. The thralls are where all the other fairy tale, folktale creatures start coming from. These thralls will shapeshift into other beings, whether they be goblins, werewolves, trolls. Very rarely, you might have someone who could even transform as a thrall into a dragon, making them some of the most dangerous thralls. These thralls are obedient to the vampire who sucked out their soul. Excuse me, I had to drink some water right there. My voice is getting scratchy. So, the thralls are very, very dangerous. If anything, that's probably one of the most dangerous things that these vampires can do. Also, they are immortal. So long as they are not killed by a Blade Mancer or by a fellow vampire who sucks out their soul, those vampires will just continue living on and on and on. These vampires cannot procreate. The only way that you can get more vampires is when you bite into one of your victims, you might, as the roulette of possibility is spun for what your thrall might become, they might become a vampire. If your thrall becomes a vampire, you actually lose all control over that thrall. That person is now their very own vampire. So it's a bit of a trade-off. You lose control over your thrall, but now you have another vampire. Another vampire means more power on your side against the humans. So I know it seems that this stream failed a bit, and everyone else got disconnected from me. Interesting. I've been having the stream going here so I can keep an eye on it. I haven't seen that. That's very, very interesting. I wonder what happened then. So that's the abilities of these vampires within Blade Mancer. Now Shade says, I have a question. Are souls able to be returned after being consumed? And your vampires are kind of similar to the undead from Dark Souls. The answer is that the souls cannot be returned. They have been consumed. And that's it. So it's one of the reasons why people really don't like vampires. Not just because of what they can create, but because when you suck out the soul, soul's gone. That's it. Now then, Blade Mancer is basically set in a historical alternate universe to Earth. So you still have, you would have England, you got America, you got France, you got Russia, you got China, you got Japan, but things are changed up because vampires do indeed exist. As far as the histories go to this and everything, the alternate history that I'm playing with here is that Dracula was at one point the greatest of all the vampires. He took on all the other vampire lords. He beat them. He created a united empire around the world of vampires. And he was poised at winning, at defeating all of humanity. And then the other vampire, then his people were beaten by the Blademancers. And Dracula sued for peace. And they're like, okay, I lost. Okay. Truly, and so what Dracula sold to humans in order to survive was this. He's like, okay, by you beating me, vampires have now gone out into the world, and I don't know where all those vampires are anymore. I lost control. Those vampires will cause immense devastation unless you know how to deal with those vampires. Your Blademancers already give you a very serious edge, but these vampires are still dangerous. So what I will do in exchange for my life is I will serve humanity. You will give me a castle where I can reside and do my own biz. You will provide me with food when I need it. And in exchange, I swear that we will serve you. And so there are vampires who are serving humans all the way leading up to World War I, which is when Blademancers takes place. And what we then have, World War I, is basically caused by other factions of vampires helping human kingdoms start up World War I and trying to use World War I's chaos. They've designed the chaos to kill as many Blademancers as possible and to assassinate Dracula and break the treaty between humans and vampires. So World War I in this story of Blademancer, World War I is a vampire conspiracy. So there you have it. That's the role that they play in the story. Their presence is mostly felt in this case through the danger that they pose if they attack you, but mostly now, thanks to Dracula, through political power. So then Comcast says, Lars, how do the thralls feel after being turned into vampires? About being former thralls? So if the thrall becomes a vampire, they're not like some other thing and then they become a vampire. They become a vampire instantly. And what you find out through the story, because one of the main characters is a vampire who was transformed by one of the big villains, she hates it. She wants to be human, but she can never be human. And so what's weird for her is that I said, vampires have souls, but in order to create a vampire, you have to suck the soul out of a human. You basically get this strange negative soul. And so she's like, I hate this. Am I really who I once was? She just hates it because she's now something else and she would rather be human. Most vampires who were transformed into vampires by having their soul sucked out and then just happening to hit the roulette wheel just right, most of them have consoled themselves in their new identity by gaining power, by living a luxurious life that's been provided to them if they adhere to the agreement made by Dracula with the Blademancers. And so that's how most of them deal with it. They just form a new identity and they move on with their lives. Those who do not like being vampires, it kind of sucks for them because either they have to just find a Blademancers to murder them, or they have to ask another vampire to kill them, or they have to somehow deal with the hunger, and which usually starts driving them insane. So it's really rough. It's really rough to be someone who is transformed into a vampire if you wish to maintain who you once were as a human. And then Shay says, I have a question. Do any religion develop certain beliefs how to defeat vampires or cultures? Within Blademancer, the answer is that various religions have incorporated the existence of vampires and Blademancers into however they wish to designate good versus evil. So it would depend on the religion that you ask. However, within the story of Blademancer, the initial way to create the blades that were then used to kill vampires was developed over in Eastern Asia with their understanding of good versus evil, of yin and yang, them realizing that vampires, even though they lost their souls, now had something else within them. So you need then something pure to override that and destroy it. which means you need to have a pure soul. How do you get a pure soul? Because there's no such thing as a pure human. Well, what if you could refine the soul like you could refine metal? And this then led them to do all kinds of crazy stuff to then create the blades that allow you to destroy vampires in Blademancer. Concrest says, so Dracula and Blademancer went the Alucard from Helsing route, but not really. How are the human-aligned vampires? Human-aligned vampires vary within the story. Some of them are actually fair enough good people. They just happen to require souls to suck. But they have a life. They enjoy that life. They don't want to hurt more humans than are necessary in order to survive. They adhere to the contract, and they continue on, and they can be seen as good people. If you wish to see them as good people, they would call themselves good. There are also other vampires who are aligned with the humans who hate the agreement. But because the agreement put them in a position of weakness, they would rather deal with the Blademancers correctly rather than try to undermine them. But then there are those vampires, the ones who initiate World War I, who again want to get rid of the Blademancers. And they're like, technology has evolved to the point now where Blademancers can be killed more easily by bullets than by vampire fangs or claws or by the power of our thralls. We can use a worldwide war to overwhelm the Blademancers and destroy them. And so that is where they are coming from. So the human-aligned vampires, you basically fall into three general categories of they're A-okay with it, they like it, or they don't like it, but they know it's a bad idea to go against the Blademancers, or they hate it and they wish to overthrow the system. Vampires losing their identities upon becoming vampires. Huh. Yeah. Interesting. Must be weird for her. Oh yeah. That's really bad for that poor vampire. She's an interesting character. I don't yet really have a good name for her. I know I once did, but it's been a while now. I've been working on so many other projects that Blademancer is really, really far back on the most back of burners. But it's definitely one story I really, really want to get to sometime around. I have a question. Could she just take her soul and put it into a human body and become a human again? She can't. Her soul has already been consumed and is gone. She can never get it back. I have a question. What scientists think of vampires? Could they genetic engineering? Could they genetically engineer a vampire? Well, according to the lore within Blademancer, there was originally a way to create vampires, but no one knows what it is, save maybe Dracula. Because when Dracula united all of the vampires way back in the day, he got all of their accumulated knowledge. Dracula knows a lot of very dangerous things, which he does not utilize because he's already lost. Dracula, at the height of his power, lost. Now, the technology and the situation of World War I could change that. But Dracula within Blademancer is like, I have already seen enough of human history over hundreds and hundreds of years to know that nothing stays forever. He knows also at some point that the contract will be dissolved and vampires and Blademancers will go to war again. But even though technology might even out the playing field with the Blademancers, this is also where in the story things get even crazier because America being America, the Americans did something that no other Blademancers ever dared do, and they began melting down their blades and making guns out of them. And those are the gunmancers or bulletmancers. Don't really know. I'm not exactly sure what I want to call them just yet. But these guys are seriously demented because what they've done by basically destroying a pure soul in the form of the sword, taking the sacrifice of someone else to transform it into another weapon, causes things to go really, really bad. And this is only a relatively new thing that's going on. And Dracula's all like, I do not want to get involved in any war with these new guys until we know what the heck is going on, because they could be even more dangerous than Blademancers. We should not get involved in a war that involves these new guys. And so he's got a lot of reasons to stay on out of it. And because of his great knowledge and not then knowing what happens with these new guys from America who've melted down their blades, he's like, don't get involved. This could be awful. So yeah. Then Comcraft says, I wonder if a vampire from Blademancer could try to cope by thinking of their human selves as their late siblings, whose memories they inherit due to the whole different soul thing. They could do that. That would actually be very interesting. It'd be a very interesting thing to explore. Thank you for the suggestion there, Comcraft. Shane says, if a vampire said the soul of a cyborg, which happened to that technology fused with his flesh, the answer is no. It's just simply the soul gets sucked in. They inherit the qualities of that soul for the briefest of time. They are able to hold on to it for like a couple of months at most. Then after that, all the qualities that they got from that soul are digested and passed through, and they need to acquire more souls to keep on going. Then Art says, I love how the Underworld movie series depicts vampires as they had a whole society and once had a great influence on humanity, but regressed over the centuries to being in the shadows. Yes. Shay says, what happened to a vampire where radiation touched them? It would probably really, really suck, especially if you took a vampire and threw them into Chernobyl. They would not like life. It would take a while for them to heal. But because they are immortal, and unless you kill them with a blade, they're just going to suffer for a long time until they manage to heal out of it. Counter says, of course, I was about to suggest blade bullets. And of course, it was the United States. LOL. Yeah, the United States in this story is going to be interesting. How the Kingdom of Lincoln overthrew the Kingdom of Washington and stuff like that. If someone has mental problems, split personality, and other things, and became a vampire, does it disappear? Or will it get worse? Depends on the situation. It could either get better or it could get worse. You're rolling the roulette of chance. So almost anything could happen. Thralls could very easily become very mentally unstable. Conquest says, I wonder what would happen if a crazy scientist invented a parasite that turns humans into vampire-like beings. Like vampires already exist, so trying to recreate it is not a question for a wacko. And that's a really, really cool idea. That's something you could definitely explore with in a vampire story, Commoncraft. I have a question. Does anybody experiment with animals and because they have souls? Because they have souls, they vampires are a human try. So did anyone experiment on what happens if you take out the soul of an animal versus the soul of a human? I would say it would be like going vegan, and not in the nicest way possible, because you need the potential of the human soul. That's one of the things that will be explored within Blademancer is why the soul? Because most vampires, of course, suck out like blood or life force. Why the soul? Because the vampire is consuming all of the potential, all of the power within a human soul. Animals are beautiful, amazing creatures. But as a friend of mine once pointed out, a pig has never designed a building, and a pig has never solved world hunger other than to be eaten as delicious bacon. Animals can only do so much. Animals, while complex, beautiful things, do not have the potential that an evolved human does. And so the soul of a human provides way more power, because you're not just simply gaining life force as the vampire, you're getting all the qualities of that soul. And so if that's really what sustains you, that means that you need potent souls. Simply consuming animals, yeah, that's really not going to do it for you. I mean, you could consume loads and loads and loads of animals and finally reach the potential of a human. But then by that point, you've had to slaughter hundreds, if not thousands, of animals. It's definitely not an economically viable option for these vampires. Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter was a thing. LOL. Ah, yes. Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. What a ridiculous story. That movie came out while I was taking a class in college about Abraham Lincoln. And the professor's like, I might give anyone extra credit if they go watch Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. I don't think anyone took him up on that because they weren't sure if he was serious or not. But considering that this guy, so very quick story time. Let me take actually a drink of water. This guy was one of the most lax professors I ever had, if not the most lax, because he was going to quit and move to another state, and so he just didn't care. He was like, I'm done here. It's all good. And so, like, for instance, during our final exam, he came into class, passed out the tests, and he had a full mug of coffee. And he's like, oh, well, you look at that. I ran out of coffee. I'm going to go get myself another cup of coffee. No one cheats while I'm gone. Wink. And then he left. And he left for about 40 minutes. And so for 40 minutes, we're all alone. Once he left, like, people like looked out the door to see if he was gone. The moment he was gone, we're like, all right, everyone. And we cheated. There were a couple of us who had read the book that we were supposed to read, who had taken notes and everything. So we got up and we gave everyone the answers to that test. Sad thing is, there were still people who flunked that test. I'm like, how could you flunk this test? We literally gave you every correct answer. But yeah, so that was the guy who was like, maybe I'll give extra credit if anyone goes watch Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. I should have done it. I should have seen if I could have gotten extra credit. I have a question. What about a nuclear soul bomb? Given what technology they have at that time, they wouldn't be able to do it. Furthermore, a nuclear bomb, its power lies within the energy that it gives off. And for that, you need to make sure that you use specific kinds of metals. So unless you make a blade off of uranium or plutonium, you're probably not going to get a very potent bomb that's just going to obliterate people with soul magic. It just wouldn't work because the science of how a nuclear bomb operates is not conducive to using magical metals. It's how you manipulate energy and the release of that energy. And it is the release of that energy and what happens as a consequence of that that makes a nuclear bomb as dangerous as it is. So I would say that even if you made a bomb using a blade, sure, maybe it might have some like horrible soul radiation effect on a vampire, but it would just still be a regular nuke. And dropping a nuke means all the horrible stuff that comes with it. Anybody tried to create half human, half vampire? There are definitely those weirdos who have tried it. It's impossible. I have a question. I asked Story is, should we exist with vampires or should we destroy vampires? Depends on the vampires. Some vampires you can live with. Some vampires you gotta kill. Just go ask Buffy the Vampire Slayer. One thing I want to point out is that I have read that birds like ravens and parrots are most likely to take humanity's place and form a civilization in the future if humanity was gone. Just remember that I was reading about Vampire the Masquerade a few days ago in the books. It was the concept of Golconda, aka Vampire Enlightenment, that even powers tied it to players can take. And there are multiple interpretations of it. Interesting. Shade says, I have a question. Do vampires develop their own language or culture or something similar to this? Depending on the story, they absolutely can. Within Blademancer, the vampires have assimilated whatever cultures they either came from or the cultures that they currently live in. So if you have vampires living in England, they are acting like British folk, more or less. If they are living in China, they are like the Chinese, more or less. Comcraft says, so think it is becoming human, other it is becoming redeemed, others think it is becoming an apex predator. One of the Golconda cults believe that vampirism that the vampiric need to drink blood is a mystical addiction with the way the blood amount and concentration increases over time and decreases with hibernation. So they became blood ascetics, drinking just enough to survive and no more. And it works partially, as they believe the only way to require, I'm not exactly sure what the word is right there, to blank Golconda is to beat the addiction first. Very interesting. Get some great, the only way to reach Golconda is to beat the addiction first. Got it. We're getting some great Vampire the Masquerade lore. So, I've given you guys my take on vampires in Blade Mancer. So we've got how the vampires are depicted over in Please Give Me Your Blood, I Will Serve You in Gratitude, and a depiction of vampires in Blade Mancer. As we get to see, there are, so many ways that you can depict vampires. So many different origins to vampires, so many different interpretations, so many different power sets and everything, that, in all honesty, again, this is all about how there's no one right or wrong way to do vampires. Most important thing is to make sure that people recognize that your more unique take on vampires are still truly vampires. So when it comes down to writing your own stories, remember these. Like, what do your vampires look like? And again, this is important because sometimes you want to go very creative. You want to have some very unique looking vampires. That's A-okay. You do not need to buy into the stereotype of how vampires look for your characters to still be vampires. Then, what abilities do they have? Because there's all different kinds of vampires. They do all different kinds of things. Know what they do. And again, this helps people to understand your take on vampires. What are the cultures and histories of these vampires? This is important to making sense of them and how they fit into your story. Most importantly, what role do they play in the story? And thinking about what vampires are, how does their presence affect others? So are they going out there devouring people left and right, day and night? Are they like a Nosferatu, a plague on humanity? Or might they be more like the vampires from Twilight, who are just trying to pass off as human and only eat so many people every now and then? Or go vegetarian and only eat animals? I mean, this all depends on how you wish, again, to explore these vampires. Or do they bring a curse or a plague? Do they make everything stormy and dark? Do things rot around them? Do they fill people with a sense of dread? Do they have a certain kind of aura? All of this. These are things that help us to understand who your vampires are and to help us to, again, see them, especially if you make them more unique, as vampires. So that way people don't say, because, I mean, again, you really want to sell people on your vampire story, who your vampires are. There will always be those people who are going to be like, well, actually, as they push their glasses up into their brains, who are going to contend with you that what you have created is not a true vampire. Well, whoop-de-flippin'-do. What is a true vampire? They'll probably point to whatever their favorite version of a vampire is. And that's okay. They can really like that. But again, there's all these different takes on vampires, all these different things that you can do with them. It's just important to understand what is really a vampire and what isn't a vampire. And if you want to use something that isn't quite a vampire, but make it part of your vampire mythos and story, then you just got to know what you need to do with it in order to make it truly a vampire. And then go forth and have fun. That's what you need to be focusing on. And that will then help you to flesh out all of the necessary lore to make your story what it needs to be. That's what all of this is about. All right. So, let's see. Congress says, for that Vampire the Masquerade crossover with Harry Potter I thought of, I just had the idea of maybe interpreting and representing vampirism as enhancement, potentially drugs, as the Tremia and others. Okay. All right. To have to use blood magic to stand up to wizards as they can't do the normal magic, and how some people who use enhancement drugs have roid rage. It's the rage. They're not zombies, they just have rage. All right, I'm taking another drink of water. All right. So, excuse me. As I can feel my voice slowly going, I think I need to wrap it up here. I do apologize, but I'm thinking like, wow, no, I'm definitely beginning to feel it in my throat. So maybe I'm coming down with something. Actually, it wouldn't surprise me. When I went to work this week, my boss was sick, and he stayed at work all the time. He stayed at work for 2 days. So I was with him for 2 days while he was sick. So it wouldn't surprise me if I'm finally if that's finally catching up to me. or if I caught something else along the way. It is fall time, is the change of seasons. So I think I'll wrap it up here, just in case, because again, I can kind of just feel it I can feel my voice and my throat kind of beginning to go. So I'll call it here. I'm going to go drink some nice tea and try to recover. But everyone, thank you so much for being here for this particular lesson. And thank you as well for talking about everything from like Tsukihime to Vampire the Masquerade to the Otterman, all of these stories and more. Like, this is fantastic. This is what a live stream brings. These kinds of communications and all of and just all of these amazing inputs. Like, I know I've learned something from you guys, and I hope that you guys have also taken some stuff away from this live stream as well, especially if you're interested in making your own vampire stories. And I wish you the absolute best with that going forward. So with all that being said, thanks so much for joining me for this live stream. Very quick note before I do wrap up, though. There will be no live stream next week. The reason for that is because it's Halloween. Yes. And I am going to be busy the whole week long with Halloween stuff. So rather than take away time from my family and friends, I'm just going to take the week off, enjoy the holiday season. I hope you guys have a great next week. If you celebrate Halloween, have a fantastic time. If you don't celebrate Halloween, I hope that you still have an absolutely fantastic time. And I'll be seeing you guys, if not in the next video, which should be coming out tomorrow, then definitely in the next live stream, which should be happening in 2 weeks. We'll at least have Scott. We're hoping to get the other members of Camille's Harem to also join us, because we are going to have some fun talking about writing memes and basically breaking stereotypes and talking about real writing advice based off of the funky stuff that people have posted online. Don't eat the metal and the candy. I will do my absolute best. And I hope you enjoy your week off, Lars. Thank you. I intend to, and I hope that you all, again, have a great week. So, until the next video, y'all, tschüss.